Step 1. Turn off the cartoons. The silence that follows is thick, like the air before a storm. I pray he doesn't stir, doesn't cry too loudly. The last thing I need is for the neighbors to hear, to wonder if something's wrong. Step 2. Calm the little beast with Goodnight Moon. He thrashes at first, his small body restless, tears wetting the pillow. But I read slower, softer, lulling him into submission. As his breathing slows, I whisper, "Good night, Mikey." And in that stillness, something always shifts. The weight of the day, of everything I do, cooking, cleaning, soothing clients, and running errands, it all fades. His deep breathing heals me. For a moment, the world feels right. I believed it would always be this way, until a few nights ago. That night, when I whispered, "Good night, Mikey," he answered back, "Goodbye." I laughed. "You're supposed to say goodnight, silly," I teased. "Goodbye means leaving, and you're not going anywhere." He looked at me then, eyes half-lidded with sleep, and said, "I know, I'll miss you, goodbye." Before I could respond, he drifted off, leaving me frozen in the dark. It felt strange, deliberate, but waking him up seemed wrong, like breaking a spell. Instead, I double-checked the locks, pulled the covers up around him, kissed his forehead, and left the door open just a crack like always. I didn't hear a sound from his room all night, but sleep refused to come. I tossed, turned, drenched in cold sweat, haunted by the way he had said, "Goodbye." What if someone had told him they were taking him away? His father? But no, that made no sense. He'd never shown any interest in Mikey before. Still, I couldn't shake the fear, and I found myself checking his room at 11 p.m., then again at 2 and tucking him back in, placing his stuffed dragon back in his arms. Finally, sleep overtook me, but it was fitful, and 7 a.m. came far too soon. Groggy and heavy-eyed, I went to wake Mikey for preschool. He was gone. The stuffed dragon, his constant companion, still lay on the bed. But Mikey, nowhere. His favorite toy was always with him. Not even for a trip to the bathroom would he leave it behind. The windows were locked. The doors bolted. Every closet, every cabinet, every nook and cranny was torn apart in a frenzy as I screamed his name until my throat was raw. I pounded on the neighbors' doors. No one had seen him. Finally, I called the police. When they came, I was barely coherent, answering their questions with a stream of, "I don't know." I mentioned how he had said goodbye last night, and one officer raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like he ran away then. We'll get this back to the station. In the meantime, check the nearby parks, playgrounds, anywhere he might go." The rest of the day passed in a blur, each second a fresh hell. That night, sleep, or what little of it came, was haunted by flashes of him, his small face, his voice saying, "Goodbye." The first thing I did in the morning was rush to his room, clinging to the desperate hope that it had all been a nightmare. What I found wasn't Mikey. On his bed was a crude crayon drawing, a smudge of blue in the shape of his pajamas. He was holding something that looked like his stuffed dragon. Beneath it, in shaky block letters, were the words, "We played." The dragon was gone, and so was Mikey. The drawing didn't mean anything. Not anymore. I had torn the room apart, desperate, searching for any sign of him. It would have been so easy to knock over one of his drawings without noticing, to misplace the stuffed dragon in my frenzy. The drawing, the one left on his bed. Maybe I had put it there in my madness. But as I stared at the crude crayon marks, doubt crawled over me like a shadow. The police had found nothing. No sign of Mikey. Then, the next morning, another drawing appeared. This one showed a taller figure me. I assumed standing next to a small blue blob, like before. Beneath it, in shaky letters, "Where are you?" That day felt endless. I patrolled the house over and over, even crawling through the heating ducts, hoping against hope that he was hiding somewhere, waiting for me to find him. I bought a security camera and set it up in his room, determined to catch whoever was leaving these drawings. It was just a matter of waiting. I tried to stay up all night, I really did. But exhaustion dragged me into a fitful sleep, and when I woke, the first thing I did was check the camera footage. There he was, Mikey, walking into his bedroom, wearing the same pajamas he'd been in the night he vanished. The stuffed dragon was tucked under his arm, just like always, but he didn't look at the camera. He went straight to the corner where his crayons were and began to draw. I watched, transfixed. 10 minutes passed as he scribbled in silence. Then he stood and placed the drawing on the bed. As he did, I saw him break the blue crayon, the pieces scattering across the floor. And then, he turned. It wasn't Mikey. The thing wearing his pajamas stood there, looking directly at the camera, but it had no face. Just smooth, taut skin stretched tight over where his features should have been, like someone had pulled latex across it, suffocating. There was no mouth, but somehow I could feel it smiling. The muscles under the skin pulled back, as if in some grotesque imitation of joy. "I know you're watching." That's what the next drawing said. Beneath it was a crude sketch of an eye. I snapped. My mind cracked, shattered under the pressure of sleepless nights, endless worry, and the creeping realization that I was losing my grip on reality. I didn't know who to show the video to, or if anyone would even see what I saw. Was it all in my head? I curled up in the corner of his room, rocking back and forth, clutching my knees to my chest. Time slipped away, and before I knew it, darkness had fallen again. I was so tired. I hadn't been to work in days. I wasn't even sure if I still had a job. The guilt gnawed at me. If I had just taken more time off to be with Mikey, maybe I could have saved him, understood his warnings before it was too late. If he had run away, it was my fault. I had driven him away. At some point, I must have fallen asleep in that corner. It was still dark when I woke, but I was so exhausted that I didn't open my eyes right away. I lay there, listening. Scratch, scratch. The sound of crayons on paper. I jolted awake, heart hammering in my chest. The noise was coming from his bed. Mikey knew something was sitting there, back turned to me, scratching away at the paper with crayons. He was humming softly, the same sing-song rhythm I used when reading Goodnight Moon to him. I stood up as quietly as I could, but he must have heard me. He stopped drawing, setting the crayon down. "Mikey?" I whispered, my voice trembling, terrified that I had finally lost my mind. The boy climbed down from the bed, his back still facing me. "Where did you go, Mikey?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why did you say goodbye? You were too busy." "You don't care," he replied in his soft, innocent voice. It was him, his voice, his words. He had a mouth. I was sure of it now. Tears streamed down my face as I rushed towards him, wrapping my arms around him. But he didn't move. He didn't hug me back. He just stood there, silent, cold. "I'm so glad you're back, Mikey," I breathed, relief flooding through me. "You have no idea how much I've missed you." But as I wrapped my arms around him, I noticed something unsettling. His face was all wrong. "I've been watching you too," he said. But his voice came not from a mouth, but from a ghastly slit that ran vertically down his neck to where his nose should have been. It opened and closed with the semblance of a smile, but it was a gaping wound, pulsing as if alive. The sound that emerged from it was a wet, gurgling whisper that reverberated like some twisted echo of his former self. Before I could fully process this horror, he latched onto my hand, dragging me towards that grotesque opening. It closed around my fingers, a vice-like grip that felt both familiar and alien. Panic surged through me as I realized just how fragile that little body was. I tried to pull free, but the wound tore wider, stretching grotesquely along his face, as if the very act of escaping was tearing him apart. But he didn't stop. He lunged at me, climbing my body with an unrelenting fervor, grabbing my other hand to force it deep into that cavernous slit. I wrenched free, ripping him open from his stomach up before I could shove him away. He was insatiable. Desperate, I threw him against the wall, the impact echoing through the room. I slammed the door shut behind me and pressed my back against it, alternating between heavy sobs and frantic breaths. I listened, heart racing. "Goodbye," was all I could hear. Panic surged as I held the door shut, dialing the police with shaking fingers. I felt the oppressive silence on the other side. No sounds of struggle, no pressure against the door. It took 10 agonizing minutes for them to arrive. When I finally opened the door to Mikey's room again, he was gone. I sprinted to my computer, pulling up the security footage, my heart pounding. The officers waited patiently, skepticism etched on their faces. I clicked on file after file, but they were all empty, filled only with darkness. I searched for last night's footage, but it was completely erased. I didn't dare return to Mikey's room until after the police left, and even then, I crept in like a thief in my own home. That's when I noticed the blue crayon smeared across the lens of the camera, as if he had tried to draw over everything, hiding the truth. There was no trace of him left, not even a drop of blood from that terrible flapping wound. What I did find was a fresh drawing, childlike yet disturbing, splattered in red. It looked like me, but there was a grotesque Pac-Man-like creature about to devour me. Underneath it, scrawled in a frantic hand, "Fun. Play again tomorrow. Good night." I hated to think about how many chances I had to play with him, all wasted because I was too busy, too tired, too caught up in everything that didn't matter. I missed him so much, the ache in my chest almost unbearable. Even if he wasn't the same as I remembered, even if I had to blindfold myself to avoid seeing what he had become, I was looking forward to tonight. I would sit down and draw with him, hoping against hope that he could understand how hard I was trying. And maybe, just maybe, he'd still be there when the morning came.